lot to pray about, isn't it? Just reminds you of, for those of us who are doing well whenever we complain, maybe we need a little nudge. I was going to say a slap upside the head, but maybe just a little nudge to remind us that we are truly blessed and we don't really have much to complain about. Okay, today we are talking about Jesus coming again. The kids are talking about this, so again, we're coordinating our studies. But I wanted to mention, because it was mentioned in the kids' curriculum, about some of the people who predicted the end of the times. We all remember, the heyday of people predicting down to the precise minute when the world was going to come to an end, Jesus was going to descend, you're going to have this great rapture. This is like this, it gets hyped up, it kind of goes in cycles. Every few years, there's like this big ramped up, the rapture is coming, Jesus is going to come out of the clouds, and this is the date we calculated. We haven't heard that for a while, but it's still definitely out there. So I'm going to mention a few. This one actually is not mentioned in the kids' curriculum, but maybe because he wasn't directly linked to end of times. But y'all remember Jim Jones? So Jim Jones, 1978, in the country of Guyana, in the town of Jonestown, known as the Jonestown Massacre. Do you guys know much about him? I actually had to look him up. I didn't know much about him because I usually don't study cult leaders. But it is interesting if you really think about it. So actually Jim Jones, I didn't know this until this week, but Jim Jones has ties to our restoration movement. He actually was ordained in the Disciples of Christ, which the disciples, originally we were part of the Disciples movement, and then there was kind of a couple different splits, but in 1909 is when we officially were considered split from the Christian churches. So the instrumental Christian churches, Churches of Christ, and then the non-instrumental Churches of Christ, they split, and it was either 1906 or 1909. And then the Disciples of Christ also split off and kind of made a bigger movement. And so now actually Bethany College in Bethany, West Virginia is a Disciples of Christ run university or college. So it used to be kind of everybody together. And so there were all these different splits. But Jim Jones was part of the Disciples movement, which is still very active today. He was ordained through the Disciples of Christ. And then he kind of went on this anti-government, we're going to free people from oppression kind of thing. And he was a good student. He never got in trouble. He was a very respectful person from everything I read. He always was found carrying his Bible, and then all of a sudden, there were reports of kind of verbal abuse, spiritual abuse going on, but it could never really be verified, apparently. Nobody would roll on him. And then things kind of got heated here out in California, and he decided to take a whole group of people, and he was notorious for telling people, pledge all of your money and possessions to me, and I'll distribute these to people in need. So that ought to be the first indicator that you're in a cult. Not okay, right? It's not okay to give your money to one individual person ever. So anyway, he took a large group of people and moved to Guyana because he said, well, we're being oppressed here in the United States, and we need to go over there and kind of start our own temple church or whatever. And so there were several reports from defectors that got back to the United States, and so there was a representative, a U.S. representative, who flew to Guyana with a group of people to kind of inspect and find out, are these people being held against their will because they are U.S. citizens. He went there and kind of got shut down, wasn't allowed into the compound from what I could tell. And then on his way to the airport, him and I think there were 3 or 4 others were shot and killed by Jim Jones' people. And so Jim Jones came back to the people the same day, and he convinced them that, we weren't able to kill everybody from that group, and so the government obviously is going to find out that we were behind it. And so then the best course of action is to have, I forget what he called this suicide. He said it wasn't a suicide, it was like a redemption suicide or something like that. And so he forced all of the people to drink cyanide-laced Kool-Aid, and there were 909 people that day who died on that compound, including about 300 children. There were quite a few people who were out of town that day, including several of Jim Jones's adult children. They were on a basketball trip. They were part of a basketball team. They were away. They came back to the news that 1,000 people, almost 1,000 people, had died. So just kind of a big, crazy mess. But it's a reminder that the charge in the scriptures, when Paul talks about it quite a lot, Jesus talks about it, Paul talks about it a lot, about like when you hear people chasing these strange genealogies and like all these weird views that aren't anything than what you learned from us, have nothing to do with it. Stay away from it. And I feel like this stuff is still definitely going on today, where people say, in the name of Christ or in the name of the Bible, we have these dates marked out. William Miller was another one of these people back in the 1800s. He predicted that on October 22nd, 1844, Christ was going to come again. Like, it was absolutely in stone it was going to happen. He had this revelation from God. He could prove it from the scriptures. Well, we're standing here today, which means October 22nd, 1844 came and went. That day is known by the Millerites as the Great Disappointment, because they were all waiting around and they had all sold their possessions. This is typical of people who pronounce that Jesus is coming again. They sell their possessions, tell people sell everything because you can't take it with you. Give to us or give to the poor, whatever. And so people sell their homes. They literally lose everything. And it's crazy. We know it's crazy, but you also, if you put yourself in the shoes of people who are true disciples, you can see how they kind of believe this stuff. And it's like this slow, gradual process of grooming and conditioning people to believe that, the Bible says Jesus is coming again. Trying to read my sign back there. That's terrible. Oh, my. The Watchtower Society, also known as the Jehovah's Witnesses, they predicted quite a few times. Listen to these dates. This is interesting to me. 1914, Jesus was going to come again. That's the Great Rapture. 1914, 1918, 1920, right? These are in rapid succession. And you can kind of see what they're doing with this, the leaders. 1914, 1918, 1920. So again, remember the message is liquidate all of your material possessions and give everything back to God, this seed money or whatever. 1914, 1918, 1920, 1925. Then you have a jump to 1941. Then a bigger jump to 1975. And then the last one was 1994. Since then, they haven't predicted that the end of the world is coming. Why do you think that is? Yeah, you lose followers. Yeah.
You lose a lot of people, credibility when you say Jesus is coming.
Mm-hmm.
He didn't come, and then you're still saying he's coming.
Yeah.
He didn't come last time. You said he was.
Yeah, and people run out of money. People who are now homeless, who once had jobs. Like they quit their jobs, they sell their homes, they sell their cars, they literally sell everything. And can you imagine being put in that position? So I know you're like chomping at the bit right now. You had interactions with Jehovah's Witnesses too.
For the 94, I don't remember that, but in 70, because they get more quiet because they know they've screwed up in the past so often.
Yeah.
So in 1975, a lot don't even send to school. And it's not just the financial, they don't send them to school. But I don't really remember, maybe a little bit from 1994 because they said it, but they didn't directly say it, they hint towards it.
Yeah.
In their publications.
Yeah. Well, what's interesting is they made a shift from this is the rapture, Jesus is coming again, he's going to come out of the clouds and descend, and these are the dates. They made a shift from this is going to happen physically to, well, this is kind of these are spiritual events that are taking place. And so it's like this heavenly event that's taken place, and so that's how they manipulate it to kind of get around that, because people were obviously starting to ask questions like, hey, wait a second. Jesus never came. We're still here, and we sold everything. And by the way, people are still doing this. Like, it's not directly tied to the rapture, so to speak, but you have snake oil people who do this all the time. Like, look at the big evangelists. You have Todd Bentley's one of the worst, and I can't believe he has any followers, but he's known as the Bam 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 preacher. He slays people with the Spirit and drop kicks them on stage, literally. The guy's an absolute nutcake, but he has tens of thousands of followers who they sell everything, literally. They're homeless people who once had good jobs who encamp outside of his events, and they can't wait to get in. And I'm like, it's just crazy. So there's Bentley, there's of course Joel Osteen, who has his Ferraris and Lamborghinis, and he's still very, very popular and probably always will be. Kenneth Copeland, same thing. He brags about his private jets that he owns. That guy's a complete quack, and people still give their money. So all this to say, we're going to look at the scriptures here, but I think this is why Jesus didn't give a date, quite frankly. Jesus says, only the Father knows. Jesus himself doesn't even know when this is going to happen. Yeah, that's right. So the message is, we'll just be ready. Don't go out and make these knee-jerk reactions where you put your family under a bridge somewhere because you made this stupid decision based on what you think might happen on a speculative date. Instead, just live your life every day right. We harp on this all the time, and Charles in his studies, all the time, he says, do what's right, always. Do the next right thing. Just live your life right, and let the rest take care of itself. So Matthew 24, verse 44. Therefore, you must also be ready, for the Son of Man is coming in an hour you do not expect. And that's in the context of nobody knows. We'll back up. We'll read this section here. Verse 36. But concerning that day and hour, no one knows, not even the angels of heaven, nor the Son, but the Father only. For as were the days of Noah, so will be the coming of the Son of Man. For as in those days before the flood, they were eating and drinking, marrying, giving in marriage, until the day when Noah entered the ark, and they were unaware until the flood came and swept them all away. So will be the coming of the Son of Man. When then two men will be in the field, one will be taken and one left. Two women will be grinding at the mill, one will be taken and one left. Therefore stay awake, for you do not know on what day your Lord is coming. But know this, that if the master of the house had known in what part of the night the thief was coming, he would have stayed awake and would not have left his house to be broken into. Therefore, you must also be ready, for the Son of Man is coming in an hour you do not expect. So the point is, don't speculate, because if you're trying to figure this out, Jesus himself doesn't even know. And you can have radical issues if you're waiting for Jesus to come again and you think it's going to happen really soon. And that was the issue in Thessalonica. So the church in Thessalonica, they were plastered to the window panes waiting for Jesus to come again. And what once was a really evangelistic church, right? Remember, Paul starts the letter in 1 Thessalonians. He's like, you guys spread the gospel so quickly and so far that there's no need for me even to talk. In all of Asia, which is a massive land area, the Thessalonica church, the church in Thessalonica, had gone everywhere. And they were just telling everybody about Jesus and were gaining legitimate converts. And we know this is true because of an extra-biblical document in circa 110 AD. And I've mentioned it so many times here, but the Pliny-Trajan letter. To me, it's one of the most important pieces of history, period, for us Christians. Because it's a governor, Governor Pliny, is writing to the emperor, Emperor Trajan at the time, in Rome. He's like, well, I don't know what to do about these Christians. They're everywhere. He's writing as if they're like some kind of disease that spread and we can't inoculate it anymore. Like there's no vaccine for these Christians. And so he was saying our temples, meaning the pagan Roman temples, our temples have been deserted. And this had, tremendous impact on Roman economy, on Roman policy, on marketplace, and on religion, the state religion. It had major implications. And so Pliny was writing Trajan, the emperor, and saying, I don't know what to do because our temples have been deserted. That was unprecedented in the Roman Empire. Absolutely unprecedented. And if you remember in AD 70, Rome came in and absolutely destroyed Jerusalem, including the temple. To this day, the temple it's in pieces. Rome came in and successfully shut down whatever this was, whatever this movement was, where Jerusalem was kind of the epicenter of it. Rome squashed that, or so they thought. So Paul's writing the church, and he's like, you guys have evangelized everywhere successfully. We know historically, not biblically, right? Because all the naysayers are going to be like, well, how do you know that they're not just like fudging numbers and making stuff up and you're fake God in the sky? We know historically. It's a fact that Christianity swept the known world at that time, period. We know it for a fact. And the church at Thessalonica had a major, major role in that. And so here's what Paul says to the church in Thessalonica. 1 Thessalonians chapter 4. 1 Thessalonians 4, verses 16. Well, let me back up to 13. They do like these little clips for the kids, but we're adults here. We're going to read more. 1 Thessalonians 4, starting in verse 13. But we do not want you to be uninformed, brothers, about those who are asleep, meaning, obviously, those who are dead, that you may not grieve as others do who have no hope. For since we believe that Jesus died and rose again, even so, through Jesus, God will bring with him those who have fallen asleep. For this we declare to you by a word from the Lord, that we who are alive, who are left until the coming of the Lord, will not precede those who have fallen asleep. For the Lord himself will descend from heaven with a cry of command, with the voice of an archangel, and with the sound of a trumpet of God, and the dead in Christ will rise first. Then we who are alive, who are left, will be caught up together with them in the clouds to meet the Lord in the air, and so we will always be with the Lord. Therefore, encourage one another with these words. So this is not like something to scare people and say, oh my goodness, like we have to wait around and we have to, like it's going to happen any minute. We better be scared. This is going to be terrifying. We're going to see people caught up, with Jesus and others are going to be left behind. Paul's saying we need to encourage each other with these words. We know that if you're a Christian, right? If you're a Christian, you don't have to worry about it. You don't have to wait. And that was kind of Paul's message in chapter 5. He talks about the times and the seasons. Now, concerning the times and the seasons, you have no need to have anything written to you. For you yourselves are fully aware that the day of the Lord will come like a thief in the night. There's that language again. People are saying, well, there's peace and security. Then suddenly destruction will come upon them as labor pains come upon a pregnant woman, and they will not escape. But you are not in darkness, brothers, for that day to surprise you like a thief. For you are children of the light, children of the day. We are not of the night or of the darkness. So then, let us not sleep as others do, but let us keep awake and be sober. For those who sleep, sleep at night. Those who get drunk are drunk at night. But since we belong to the day, let us be sober, having put on the breastplate of faith and love, and for a helmet of hope of salvation. And then he goes on, and he kind of tells them, like, you need to warn people who are being idle. Well, where did the idleness come from? Why did a church so eager to spread the gospel, why are they now being lazy bones? Well, contextually, it's all linked to this. They were waiting for Jesus to come, and some were like propping their feet up and we're like, all right, like we've done our work. Our work is complete. We know that he's coming back any minute now. And we're just going to wait. And I think maybe a lesser extreme of that today, among us, among Christians, American Christians probably especially, it's a C word. Complacency. Maybe in our mind we're not like directly thinking, well, okay, Jesus is going to come any minute. But we are, if we're being honest, we're like, all right, I'm saved. I've been a Christian my whole life. And we hit the cruise control button. We just kind of cruise through life with no sense of urgency, no radical sense of urgency to talk to people who are unsaved. And I mean, if we're honest, like we see unsaved people dying all the time. Do we not?
I think the other side of that is when the people are like, okay, came back and say, oh yeah, I'm ready for him to come tomorrow because he's coming tomorrow.
Mm-hmm.
But in our culture, we have people that are like, that's not going to happen in our lifetime.
Yeah. That's right.
It's going to be hundreds of years. And they're going
Yep.
to come in sometime way in the future, so there's nothing I can do about it.
Yeah.
And the other side of like the same action, like, no, nothing I can do because it's not something that is happening.
I think you're right. I think we're on the opposite end of the spectrum as the Thessalonian church. But the result is really similar.
Yeah, like we're all like, okay.
Because they were like, hey, we have worked our tails into the ground, right? Like we have literally swept the known world with the gospel of Christ. And they did. Like Paul acknowledges that. Paul's like, you guys, oh my goodness. For Paul to say that there's no need for me in this area is a really big deal because Paul tells the Corinthian church, I prefer to go to places where the gospel is not known. Like Paul's whole MO was to go into uncharted territory because he was really good at it. And I think that's that was really Paul's spiritual gift, was to go to places where the gospel was completely unknown and just completely start with a blank canvas. And I think Paul was like this Christian artist who painted this scene of Jesus and just did it brilliantly, where so many people came to Christ who had never even heard. Think of Athens. When Paul goes into Athens, like, oh, he's on Mars Hill, and he's like, I see in every way you're a very religious people. In fact, you're so religious, you have this plaque to an unknown God. Let me tell you about this unknown God. Like, you know, Paul loved going into places where they had never heard of God.
Yeah, I think there are two causes for what Brenda was talking about how we tend to not think of it as an imminent event. One is human nature. You know, they thought it was going to come happen soon because Jesus had just left not that long ago, and so to them it was like, well, if he's been gone this long, he's going to come real soon. To us, it's like, oh, it's been 2,000 years. It's probably going to be 2,000 more years.
That's right.
So that's human
That's
nature.
right.
The other thing is the premillennial is teaching that there's going to be all these signs, and we're trying to predict signs and see what's happening.
Yeah.
And all that sort of stuff has really crept into most, I think, religious discussions or beliefs
Sure.
within churches, and people, I think, oftentimes don't even realize that they're even talking about that system of belief when they're talking about signs that have to happen or things like that. And so I think that those two things combined lend us to think more that it's a far off thing as opposed to an imminent thing.
Well, it was interesting too, because I mean, it's very interesting you mentioned that, because we don't talk a lot about premillennialism and amillennialism and postmillennialism. I just don't have a whole lot of interest in it, because for me, like, to study it historically is kind of interesting, but like, if we truly believe this, then it doesn't really matter. You know, like, this whole 1,000-year reign, who knows? You know, like, at the end of the day, if Jesus doesn't know, I'm certainly not going to be arrogant enough to try to figure that out. That's kind of my stance. I'm like, whatever. But a lot of us don't realize that our history in the Restoration churches was deeply embedded in this. Like, Alexander Campbell was hardcore. Like, he believed in the 1,000-year reign, and that things had to get better and better and better leading up to Christ coming back again. Like, those were going to be the signs that things are getting better. There's kind of this trajectory. And he was absolutely sent into a tailspin. I mean, quite literally, when the Civil War took place, like right at the end of his life, he was so baffled by that. He couldn't wrap his theological brain around that, because like, this wasn't supposed to happen. Things were supposed to be getting better and better. And his whole life, he had seen what the Thessalonica church experienced for years, you know, for decades, where
Whenever talking about that kind of thing, it's like whenever you talk about end times and people's views on that and those other things, I'm like, as long as it doesn't compromise somebody's faith, I don't really care. Like,
sure,
whenever,
yeah.
If, you know, sometimes when people are looking for these signs, and then you're following somebody who specifically said, oh, I think this is going to happen, and then then they just fall flat because it didn't happen.
Yeah, that's right. And not just fall flat, but it spirals them. You know, look at these true believers, and believe me, like, there's still a lot of people who, like, you'll hear they talk about the rapture. You'll hear that word a lot. Like, the rapture is coming, and like, they're so wrapped up in that becomes, in my opinion, that becomes a religion itself. It's like a subdivision of religion where that's an actual religion. And I think it's very dangerous, and we're up on the clock, but I want to end with saying this too. I think there's one other component that just came to mind that affects us as Americans, and that's Western medicine, where we have this notion of immortality. We truly are products of this. We are immortal. If you look at the way people age now, we don't want to age physically, like, you know, like, just physically, we do not like to age. And so people are really, in a lot of ways, taking better care of themselves physically. They're eating better, they're drinking more water, they're into fitness. Then you get the cosmetics going on, then you know, all kinds of things. But there's the other thing too, and we all know this and understand this. We don't do death well. We don't talk about it enough, and we don't do death well. And when somebody dies quote unquote prematurely, which how do you define that? When somebody dies prematurely, it wrecks our world, and we're so surprised by it. And at this point, like we know that the mortality rate is 100% and that there's no guarantee for tomorrow to happen. And so when it happens, we're so mystified by that. And so I think that prolongs that. In our minds, we have the sense that I'm going to live forever. I'm going to live till I'm 100 at least. Like all of us have that inside of us because we're conditioned by our culture to believe that. And so that in my opinion, that kind of provides among Christians a sense of, well, I've got time, right? Like there is no sense of urgency because I've got the whole rest of my life. I'm young, I'm young. Yeah, I know. We're out of time. I'm going to stop there, but